On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story. I grew up with both of my parents in the house. We called them Mom and Pops. They weren't the Cosbys, that's for sure. Pops was a nigga in every single context of the word. If you think about everything that parents warn their teen daughters to stay away from, you come up with a picture of that nigga. Mom met Pops at the convenience store where she worked at the time. She always told the story like it was romantic or something, but there was never anything sweet about any of it. Pops came into the store to buy a pack of cigarettes, and they got to talking. I can't leave out the part about the woman that was waiting in the car for him because that's important. Her name was Celia. Either way, he got Mom's phone number and everything just went from there. Mom was 19, and she already had my older brother Kendrick. He was 2 years old at the time. Ma had been struggling to hold it down as a single mother, and I guess she was glad to have somebody around that didn't think she was damaged goods. Ma had a little apartment that she got through the housing department, and even though it was against the rules, Pops moved in a couple of months after they met. I was born shortly thereafter, and I'm Ken Matthews. It should be noted that my name was spelled with all capital letters. It's on my birth certificate that way and everything. But even my name is a part of the dysfunction that started to take place very early in my life. My older brother's name was Kendrick. We called him Kenny. When Mom got pregnant with me, she decided that she wanted to name me something similar to Kenny's name. I later learned that Ken was Pop's pick. Why? For emphasis. I would always be placed in a position to be more prominent than Kenny because I was biologically Mom and Pop's child. That's why my name was capitalized. For emphasis. But Kenny's name wasn't capitalized because he was regular. Even though Kenny called him Pops, it was obvious that Pops wasn't his biological father. Kenny was 2 when my parents met. Otherwise, all you had to do was look at us all together. Me, Ma, and Pops were all light brown, and I looked very much like Pops. But Kenny, he could have been fully European for all I knew. He was nearly white with eyes that changed between gray and green, depending on the day, I guess. And even though he was Pops to us both, it was obvious that I received better treatment than Kenny. I was the chosen one. I was Ken, with emphasis. That came with its perks, of course, but it's something that I feel guilty about for a long time. A very, very, very long time. Chapter 2, Levels. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Weirdly enough, none of it really seemed strange. I guess it was just our normal. Mom went to work, me and Kenny went to school, and Pops did whatever Pops did. Every once in a while, he'd take it all the way up to his level, and he'd have to make it up to Mom. It just so happened that the levels kept leveling up. Your experiences make the difference in how you see things. If you had asked anybody else, the lowest of the levels would have been too much. The fact that Pops didn't work would have been it for some women. The fact that he was a cheater may have been the breaking point for some others. But those things were at the very bottom for Mom. And because she tolerated them, they all felt very normal for me and Kenny. But even with that being the case, we still weren't blind. Even as kids, we realized that things were escalating. In the beginning, cheating was the standard. Pops never came home and announced it, but we knew. Mom knew too. There was always a rumor or some random woman popping up. Mom found women's items in our apartments or in our car on more than one occasion. She even found women in our apartment, but I guess that wasn't enough. Pops had to push it a little bit further. Then came Adrian. But it wasn't just enough to cheat and have a baby. At a certain point in time, Pops started staying out. It was a gradual thing. At first, he'd leave out for a few hours after Mom came home from work. The time increased little by little. In the beginning, he just wasn't there when we went to bed. But once he started leveling up, he would easily not be there when we woke up in the morning. I remember the first time it happened. Well, maybe it wasn't the first time it happened. Maybe it was the first time I noticed. We got up for school in the morning, and Mom was in a terrible mood. She was slapping lotion on our faces all hard and mumbling under her breath. Ma walked us outside like she did every morning. Miss Virginia lived real close, but Ma always watched us walk to her apartment. "Where's the car?" asked Kenny. I noticed that the car wasn't there too, but Kenny was the first to ask, as usual. Cutting no corners, Ma said, Your daddy been out whoring all night, about to make me late for work. Just like that. That afternoon, me and Kenny got off the bus at Miss Virginia's like we did every other day, but Mom picked us up earlier than usual. In my mind, I understood that to mean that she either left work early or hadn't gone at all. When we got into our apartment, it was spotless. But Pops, he was a mess. I hadn't ever seen anything like it. He had scratches all over his face and another black eye. Neither of them ever explained what happened. Ma just told us to get started on our homework. Pop stayed home for like 2 days. I think I was 8. But that's basically how things went. All Pops had to do was break the ice one time and get it over with. After he took whatever consequences that came with doing it the first time, he was definitely going to do it again. It's like Mom only had the energy to really act out once. After that first time, he started staying out regularly. It wasn't unusual for Ma to have to catch a ride to work because Pops hadn't come home with the car. In the beginning, he'd at least pick her up from work in the afternoons. But as the time went on, if he stayed out all night, Ma already knew that she had to catch a ride to and from work. And when he'd finally make it in, he'd say something crazy like, "What you want me to say, Trisha?" Those were the times where Ma and Pops would fuss all night, and then he'd tell her that she was the reason why he didn't want to come home. And then he leveled up. Ma and Pops got into it one night after he had been gone for 2 days. Me and Kenny listened with our ears to the wall, ready to hear all the insults that Ma had on deck. That's how it usually went. Ma was funny, always talking about how Pops couldn't read. But that night, we heard more than we bargained for. It started out with a thump sound, like something was hitting the wall. Me and Kenny both looked at each other, wondering what was going on, but we didn't have to wonder for long. All of a sudden, we heard Ma yelling, "Get off me, Chris!" We could hear the fear in her voice. Me and Kenny burst into their bedroom and found Pops sitting on top of Ma. He was yelling and punching her in the face. I stood in the doorway, frozen in place. In all the years that I had witnessed my parents' dysfunction, I hadn't ever seen Pops put his hands on Ma. It had always been the other way around. I guess my mind couldn't process it, but Kenny's mind processed it just fine, and he wasn't having it. Kenny never had a scared bone in his body, and he was always ready. Kenny jumped on Pops from behind, wrapping his arms around his neck. Obviously unable to stand up to a grown man, Kenny was quickly thrown to the ground, but it distracted Pops enough to let Ma get up. She motioned for me to come towards her, probably because she assumed that Pops wouldn't hit her if I was close. Once I was wrapped in her arms, Ma started yelling at Pops. Get out with your illiterate self." Kenny chuckled a little bit. Pops angrily pulled his shirt down as he walked towards the doorway. And out of nowhere, he pushed Kenny onto the floor. Ma yelled out, "Keep your hands off of him." Pops came back 2 days later with some lamps that Ma had been looking at. I was 10. Kenny was 13. It's like I said before, all Pops needed was one time. After that night, him and Ma fighting was a regular thing. Kenny getting in the middle of it was a regular thing too. It's crazy because there was an obvious beef between Pops and Kenny. As crazy as it sounds, there always had been. It wasn't really beef at first. It was just obvious that Pops treated me differently, and I think Kenny noticed. Pops never gave me anything extra because he didn't have anything to give me, but he talked to me differently. He showed me more attention and played around with me a little bit more. Pops never said that he wasn't Kenny's father, but he always slid in little jabs or called him high yellow. It probably would have been worse if Mom was a different type of mother. She ain't play that favorite kid thing. Pops had to at least pretend that he felt the same about Kenny. But their relationship seemed to get worse after that first fight. It was like there was always something heavy in the air when they were around each other. Like there was always something about to happen. Kenny never let go of the fact that Pops pushed him down that night, and he obviously hated the fact that he was fighting on Ma. I ain't like the fact that he was fighting on Ma either, but it was different. I was a scrawny 10-year-old boy, and being honest, I had a different relationship with Pops than Kenny did. I felt equally loyal to both parents, but Kenny didn't. He very obviously considered Pops to be the parent on the outs. When me and Kenny were by ourselves, He used to say, "I'm a wail on Pops when I get big enough." Every time I'd say, "You ain't gonna do nothing." And Kenny would respond the exact same way every single time. He'd say, "You ain't gonna do nothing. Watch what I do." I'd only say it to get him worked out, but I knew he was serious. Kenny was 13 and he had already started to establish himself as a bit of a bully. He was a little more muscular than most of the boys his age, and he didn't mind pulling rank. I was 10, and none of the neighborhood boys would bother me because they were all scared of Red Kenny. He was a by any means type of boy. The other kids didn't even have to do anything. They just had to act like they wanted to. Kenny got suspended so many times one year that they asked him not to come back to school. They didn't even have an actual rule or code for it. They just asked Ma if he could stay home for the rest of the school year. He drove Ma crazy that year. And whenever she would ask why he was doing that stuff, he'd say he didn't know. Honestly, I don't think he knew at the time. I think he was just angry. He had a lot to be angry about. We both did. A lot got skipped over, but I'll go back for a minute because I need to. Between the points where Pop started cheating and Pop started beating, something happened. I was 9 and Kenny was 12. Ma was at work and Pops was out. Kenny had a habit of going through their things when they weren't at home, mostly to look at porn tapes or to steal change. But that day, Kenny found something that he wasn't looking for. I was playing a video game when Kenny yelled out, "Hey Ken, come here real quick." I walked into Mom and Pop's room to find Kenny standing in front of an open drawer. "You always doing something," I said. But Kenny never answered. He opened his hand, exposing several bags filled with small ivory-colored nuggets. I had no idea what they were, but the look on Kenny's face let me know that he absolutely did. Seeing that I was confused, Kenny filled in the blanks. "It's crack, stupid." I was 9 years old. I had seen crack referenced on TV or heard the random "your mama's a crackhead" joke at school, but I ain't know nothing else about it. I certainly hadn't ever seen it in real life. I wondered how Kenny had such a clear understanding about it at 12 years old, but that was secondary at the time. Ma and Pops had crack in the house, so we had to wonder, were they crackheads? It was 1987, and everything I had ever heard about crack was to the extreme. Anybody that had a drug habit on TV looked like a walking corpse. Ma and Pops didn't look like that, so they couldn't be on drugs, right? Me and Kenny both agreed that they were probably keeping it for somebody, but just in case, we were always watching them for crackhead signs. If anything looked out of the ordinary with either of them, we'd look at the other and wonder if that was the sign. It's crazy how we were so smart and so dumb at the same time. It turns out that they weren't holding the drugs for someone else. The drugs were theirs, but they weren't doing them. They were selling them, very discreetly at first. But like everything else, it started leveling up. And that's when life got real. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with family, friends, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.